Hi, friends. My name is Shawne Arceneaux, but you can call me Shawne. I'm a board-certified nurse coach and holistic healer, and I want to help you transform your life in a way that feels in total alignment with your heart and who you truly are. Each week, I'll be sharing with you my tips on how to become more empowered in your own wellness journey and create a vibrant, fulfilling life that reflects your values and your truth. You'll hear insightful interviews on different life and wellness topics and stories from myself and other beautiful souls who share my mission of spreading love and light in this sometimes dark world. My hope for this podcast is that you will walk away feeling inspired and more aligned in your purpose. This is your permission to get curious and lean into your intuition as we all learn and grow together. Welcome to the Aligned and Well podcast. All right, everyone. Welcome back to the Aligned and Well podcast. I have a really exciting guest for all of you today. Her name's Aiua Wild. I'll read a little bit about Aiua and then we'll get it. I'll give her some space to kind of talk a little bit further about what she does. But Aiua is the founder of Wild Nature Retreat, as well as the creator and operator of Sensuous Revival Healing Arts. Her role is really to guide people back to their wholeness and greatest self-expression through pleasure-focused goals. We break through old patterns of trauma and learn to walk on our heart's divine path, no matter how that may look, and healing any fear, guilt, or shame that we might have been challenged by in this lifetime and ancestral. And I'm really, really stoked to have her on the podcast to kind of talk about all of these themes, the themes that have to do with the beautiful work that she does. So Aiua, welcome. And I'm really excited to have you.
Thank you. Yeah, it's so fun being here. I would say, well, anybody who's listened to the other few podcasts that I've done, I always talk about how it's been a dream of mine to create my own. And a couple of years ago, I was like, I want to be on other people's podcasts. And so now I'm actually getting to really live into that dream. So it's fun.
Yeah. I'm so excited. And yeah, like your story, the work that you do is so powerful. I know I just read a little bit of a bio, but could you give my listeners just a little more of your story and how you came to be here and doing the work that you do?
Yeah,
That's
I'm
a loaded
giggling
question.
inside. Well, so right before we started recording, I was telling you that I just had a little session with my daughter. She's going to be 17 in October. And I got to share a little bit of that with her. So there's the how I got here, and then there's the professional credentials. And then what I actually was referencing with her was my soul contract that before I was born into this body, I agreed to the terms and conditions of this path. And why I have come to kind of claim that story as my initiation is because that's what gets me through some of the darkest times, is to remember that I am capable and that I was made for this. And so how I got here in this moment, oh my God. So I would just say everything has kind of spawned off of the the deep foundation of recovery and recovery in all forms. And it started off in counseling, and then I got sober, and getting sober really helped open me up to the truth of who I am. I didn't know that that's what was being unlocked in that moment, but my spiritual self, my God self. And then after preaching recovery for pretty hardcore for many years, I was doing a lot of sponsorship and working in the 12-step world. I realized, one, how passionate I was about being of service to others. I had already been working in the service industry as an esthetician for almost 4 years. at that time. And so I started studying how to become a coach, basically. And the funny thing is when you're a sponsor, you're already coaching. Like
Mhm.
you're available to people in their, darkest times and walking through a program that's outlined. And so it was a pretty easy transition for me. And in human design, I'm a generator 5-1. And that one line for me means that I am a insatiable forever student. And
Mhm.
so my depth of learning and studying are just endless. And so it's kind of been the onslaught of recovering my own awakening and kind of reclaiming who I am as a human being, right? There's who I am in truth and the essence of me as a spiritual being. And then these last several years have been like, yeah, but who am I as a human being? And can I learn to celebrate that?
Mhm.
Um, which is where a lot of the sexuality, sensuality, promoting, liberated expression, things like that. That's where it's really um, began to take more clear shape. And I would say that that's kind of always going to be an unraveling as I
Mhm.
continue to study and practice. And, it's this evolution. But um, yeah, if I sit with what does it mean to be here in this moment right now?
Mhm.
Oh, I love that I can say this and actually feel it. It's like, I'm grateful to be alive
Mhm.
and I'm grateful to feel that gratitude because that's not always the case for me. My head can get real dark real fast.
Mhm.
Um, and then it manifests in symptoms where I literally feel heavy, can't get out of bed, or that's the story. I can't get out of bed, which isn't true. I can and I will.
Mhm.
Um, so yeah, it's become this almost comical understanding of what it is to like play the game of being human today.
Mhm. Ooh, yeah. I really love that. And I wonder if you can kind of dive a little bit deeper into, like you said, that there's the soul part of you, the essence of who you are, and then like what it means to be human. And if we can kind of untangle both of those, because yeah, like I
Yeah.
wonder if we can have like we can talk about a little bit about like the difference of each one.
Yeah. So my first answer is that they're not separate.
Hmm.
The foundation of my spiritual practice is really around non duality.
Hmm.
Um, and and as I continue to learn more about my experience of being human and who this character is, right? Like, um, I can fall into the illusion that they are somehow separate or that I'm separate from you or anything or anyone that passes by in my line of sight, right?
Right.
So when I speak to, for me and my understanding and my practice is that my spirit and my soul are two different things.
Hmm.
So the spirit of me is the one. It is God. It is love. It is creator. It is creation. It is everything. My soul is the path that I inherited or adopted in when I came incarnated into this body. And so, um, the essence of me is not separate. It
Hmm.
is it is not the way that I identify with my mind or my ego, right? My spirit doesn't have brown hair. My spirit doesn't have green eyes. My spirit doesn't feel pain,
Hmm.
right? It is the purity of all things. Um, and my soul has some shit to say about that.
Yeah.
My soul is the vibrancy of what I have to offer in this lifetime. It's the way I show up, being of service. It's the one who grieves the ancestral pain of what it means to be a magical woman.
Mm-hmm.
It's the one who weeps as I hold my daughter during her session as she's walking through her first real heartbreak.
Yeah.
It's the one that has bones and blood and water and veins and organs and
Mm-hmm.
that, you know, and when I named my company Sensuous Revival,
Mm-hmm.
I had no idea what it was actually going to evolve into. Like it was, I don't want to say it was superficial. It wasn't superficial. It
Mm-hmm.
was definitely influenced by a lot of spirit and yeah, but I would say that it's definitely evolved into a much deeper meaning for me today. Like, what does it mean to be a sensuous being?
Mm-hmm.
And most people hear the word sensuous and they just think sex,
Yeah.
but it's all of our senses.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and reviving all of our senses, including our sense of intuition,
Mm-hmm.
our sense of truth and spirit, and what's on the other side of the veil,
Yeah.
um, and befriending all of it. So,
Mm. So beautiful. It's like really capturing the human experience in all ways, in all forms. Yeah, I know your work kind of there's a lot of different things that you do, but if we could like summarize what it is you help people with, what it is that you like your medicine, well, how would
mm,
you describe it?
it's interesting because I've been thinking about sending out, I'm horrible at this. This is the admin side of my business. And I'm like, I need an assistant. So I am calling in like an intern, like somebody who wants to train. I have a client actually that I've been working with off and on, and she's going to be moving back into the area. So I'm hopeful that she'll be working with me in that way. So I was about to send out a request to my previous clients or my current clients and asking them, like, if you were to summarize what we do, what would you say? Because I know what it is for me,
Mm-hmm.
but I'm curious how it's actually received and perceived. And
Mm-hmm.
a couple of weeks ago, I had lunch with a friend who was also a previous client of mine. And part of why I chose to be a coach and not a therapist is
Mm-hmm.
I want to be able to see my people and have relationships.
Yeah.
And we're eating, and she goes, I need to tell you something. And I was like, okay. She goes, like, I need you to really hear it with your whole heart. And I'm like, okay. So I like put my food down because I'm like, oh God, what is happening? And she said, I just want to thank you. You saved my life. And I don't want that to be my tagline. Like, I don't want that to be the expectation.
Yeah.
But I know what that feels like to be in the presence of another person where the work that I had done in that moment or over that time frame saved my life. And
Mm-hmm.
so if I were to say, you know, what is my favorite thing to do with people? It's to be able to look them lovingly in their eyes when they feel like they have good reason to be rejected or abandoned.
Mm-hmm.
And I can love them in that space.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, to get more logical,
Yeah.
there's a lot of untangling and an unwrapping of um, belief systems. That's a big part of the work that I do is helping people identify their untrue belief systems so that they can understand what is actually um, instigating the
Mm-hmm.
behavioral patterns that they may not want to engage in anymore. And it's not enough to just know what your belief systems are. You have to know what to do with that awareness. And so I
Mm-hmm.
teach people how to replace the untrue with the true. And we do a lot of like practices that help me understand how does this person learn? You
Mm-hmm.
know, we all have different learning styles, right? I remember going to aesthetic school and it was like,
Yeah.
are you a visual learner? Are you a doer? You know, like we had all these methods. And so in the first phase of our work together, it's learning how do they learn, and then teaching them different practical strategies to embody and integrate what it is they're learning.
Yeah.
And that's the sensual or the sensuous part of the work is um, we're all very heady.
Yeah.
And
Oh,
so,
totally. Mm-hmm.
right, if I
Yep.
ask somebody like, well, how did that feel? They'll often tell me what they thought.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
so sometimes it's teaching people how to actually feel, which that's a big portion of my work is actually creating a space where they feel safe in their body with their nervous system and their thoughts to be able to unpack all the armor that they've been building up to try to create what is a false sense of safety.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. This
Yeah.
is probably going to hit so hard. A lot of the people that listen to this podcast are nurses. So
Mm,
you can imagine the like logical side of things where we come from in the hospital setting, in the healthcare setting, and how like it can be really difficult. Like I mean, a lot of my clients say the same thing whenever I ask them, "Where did you feel that in their body?" They'll tell me what they're thinking, and
hmm.
it's interesting. It's interesting how heady, like you said, we are. Um, do you have an example of how you do that with someone? Like what's a practice or an exercise that you found to be really helpful in helping people tap in?
Yes. Yes. So for people who just want to like jump in, there's an organization if you want to start practicing and studying your own. Um, well, let me back up a bit. So the way that I work with people is I have taken a fusion of all the different methods and modalities that I've studied and practiced over almost 15 years now.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and at the foundation of the process that I use is actually from an organization called Choose Again. And they're an incredible organization. And what I found was that if I only used those 6 steps, I was good. But I wanted to be more than good. I wanted to feel really, really amazing. And I wanted to have a little bit more expansiveness. And this isn't a criticism of their format. It just was like, I knew that I needed to expand on that a little bit. And so within that format, I've expanded it by introducing a somatic, 2 different things. Well, probably a lot of different things, but
Mm-hmm.
the two
Yeah.
main ones is somatic work as well as intuitive body talk.
Mm.
And I'll probably need to unpack those a little bit for people. But the simplest form is um, somatics is if you could imagine whatever sensations are happening in your body and your energy field, um, that it's a messenger, or I like to consider it a compass. And the compass is pointing to you to the root cause of wherever that dis-ease is coming from. And then the intuitive body talk side is that you can put that sensation in interpretation and put it into words.
Mm-hmm.
So, for instance, most counselors, therapists, psychiatry, psychology backgrounds will give people an example of an emotion, right? Or they'll give even like, I have this in my office and I very rarely use it. And unless I have people that are very heady, and that's kind of the beginning place, but it's a feeling sheet.
Mm-hmm.
And so we'll be talking about angry, betrayed, confused, dejected. I'm going down the alphabet list. I don't know if you caught that.
Yeah.
The common ones are going to be angry, sad, frustrated, confused, scared. Um, those are the top common ones.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but in my process, as I use the foundation of the 6 steps, I take you into the sensations that live in your body.
Mm-hmm.
So, and most of the time when we begin this practice, I have people close their eyes, and that's to reduce your senses to enhance the others that are remaining. So, your felt sense, your intuition. And so, one of the examples that I like to give people when I first start working with them is like, I have a very common pattern of feeling annoyed. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I get very annoyed at the world. Like, why are you doing that? Whatever it is, that's my judgy side. And how that usually feels for me is like this tight band across my chest.
Mm-hmm.
And so the way that the process works is first you have to acknowledge that you're upset. And to acknowledge it just means that you're no longer at peace, right? My teacher says all upsets are equal, right? They're equally disruptive. And I tell people that a drop of cyanide in a pot of honey is no longer a pot of honey. Like it's equally poisonous to our
Yeah.
peace, right?
Mm-hmm.
So step one is just acknowledging, like, I'm not good right now, right?
Mm-hmm.
Step two is to own it. And this one's really hard for people who are really kind of stuck in that victim role
Yeah.
where they want to blame the circumstances, they want to blame the other person, they want to blame themselves, right? So this takes blame completely off the table. There's no blaming you and there's no blaming me, but it is an empowering step when you take that because you also acknowledge that you have the ability to change it.
Mm-hmm.
So step three is to feel it. So step two and three is where a lot of people will get lost in trying to do this work, especially alone for the
Mm-hmm.
beginning parts of it. Feeling our feelings for a majority of the people in our culture is very foreign, right? We are all so numb and dissociated from our feelings and our emotions and how it lives in our body. This is a big part of where my work really takes hold, um, because I can hold a really powerful anchor in the container to allow people to emote on a grand scale. Everything from wailing and sobbing to screaming and punching to weeping to actually going into numbness. A lot of people don't know that numb is a feeling,
Mm-hmm.
and just sitting with it and being patient, right? Because you ask somebody how they're feeling. If they don't know right away, they're going to say, I don't know. Like,
Mm-hmm.
okay, well, let's sit with that,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
So step three takes practice.
Mm-hmm.
In step three is where the somatics comes in. So if somebody says to me, I feel annoyed, then I would say, okay, wonderful. Can you tell me how that feels in your body? And if they're used to being numb, they might say, what do you mean? Or I don't know. And so I would just invite them to breathe and scan their body, right? If people get stuck in numb, then we work with numb.
Mm-hmm.
Because the next step after that, once they've expressed the sensation in their body, and some people might say, I feel rage in my face, or I feel heat in my face, or I feel tightness in my fist, or I feel a knot in my stomach, or I feel fire in my thighs, or electricity in my feet, right? There's so many different ways.
Mm-hmm.
Um, there's there's tension, there's pressure, there's stabbing, there's all these kind of like more expressive ways of being able to reference feelings in
Yeah.
the mind and the body, knowing that they're not separate.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so then step four is let's find out the first time you ever remember feeling this way. And this is where this work for me was a game changer compared to a lot of other work that I had done. Um, because we're actually taking it back to the root of the conscious, like the root of the level of consciousness that we currently have in this moment. So if somebody was feeling frustrated and their memory was 3 months ago, that's beautiful. The more we practice it, it might unlock the doors. And where we're trying to get to is the formative years of where the
Yeah.
neural pathways in our brains were actually formed, which is depending on who you're talking to, birth to 8 to 10.
Yeah.
But if you do some of the deeper work, it's actually past lives and ancestral. So
Mm-hmm.
most of us beginning in the work, it's like, can we just get to those beginning years? And even that, a lot of times, can take people several weeks, if not months, to unlock, depending on how
Mm-hmm.
much trauma you had.
Mm-hmm.
So once we have a memory, no matter where it is, we can work with it. And when we get into the memory, the invitation is to have the person be in the mind frame of that level of development, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if I'm 45 and I'm remembering a time when I'm 22, then you want to be thinking the thoughts and re-engaging with that level of emotional maturity as well as intellect, right?
Mm-hmm.
So when we're identifying belief systems, sometimes people are very protective of who they think they are today, and they don't want to identify with maybe some of the really harsh, judgmental, or negative thoughts that they may have had as a young person, right?
Yeah. It's like they're
So,
frozen in time almost. Like those parts
yeah,
are frozen in time.
frozen in time, and people are afraid to feel the the guilt, the shame, and the grief or the sadness for having said thoughts about themselves.
Yeah.
Or a lot of times, what happened, particularly in people that have been maybe on a spiritual journey or a wellness walk, that they know better now,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Um, so, for instance, anybody who has parents that got divorced, um, now they've done all the, forgiveness as an adult. And so they don't want to give themselves permission to like be angry or confused
Yep.
or blame themselves for the divorce when maybe as a child that's actually what was happening.
Yep.
And
Mm-hmm.
so there's this like armor, right? That sometimes my job is to not knock it down and be like, no, that is what you're thinking or that is what
Right.
you're feeling. But let's talk a little bit more about that. And it's usually through question
Mm-hmm.
that you'll see people's lights turn on. I get a lot of giggles and a lot of fuck yous. Like,
That's how
fuck
you know you're
you.
hitting like the right mark, right?
Yeah. Um, I have this one person in particular right now that has this very like strong persona.
Mm-hmm.
And so when they kind of crack open and begin to melt, there's so much beauty and gratitude that they have, but also that like, oh, just like, how
Yeah.
did you know? Which is just, it's a wonderful gift as a provider and a facilitator. So once we get into the memory, I know I'm like really long winded here, and by all means, feel free to message
You're good.
me or
Yeah.
look online at it's choose-again.com, I believe. Anyway, or just look up 6 Steps to Freedom. You'll get it very, very simply written out. So in step 4, we go back to the memory. And then from the memory, usually I ask, can you give me the cliff notes of the scenario? And here's why. We are addicted to the chemicals that release in our bodies and minds when we go into the traumatic stories.
Mm-hmm.
And when that happens, we strengthen those pathways, which means that we will continue to go down that story. If you've ever had a friend who likes to tell the same sob story over and over again, and no matter how many times you try to like work around it, that's the same thing that keeps happening.
Mm-hmm.
So this is where we put a stop to that. So I say, tell me a little bit, give me a short version of like what's happening in that situation. And if we're in a childhood's memory bank, then we might look at my parents were fighting, or my brother or sister was getting in trouble, or we were in the car and there was a loud noise, right? Like there's so many different variations.
Mm-hmm.
Um, then I asked them, like, what was that feeling like for you in that memory, which is basically remembering that we're coming back to that feeling and that sensation. And then I asked them specifically, what did you believe about yourself for being in that situation?
Mm.
And they will either answer it directly and be very specific about themselves, or they will still project and talk about the other person or the other people and what was happening. And
Mm-hmm.
again, this is where I'm good at my job, and I can help kind of catch that and redirect it and invite them back into like, yes, so what did that say about you?
Mm-hmm.
And this is where we get to identify those untrue beliefs. So, depending on the person, their learning style, how familiar they are with the somatics, in that stage, I will either move on to step 5, or I will give them an opportunity to uh, do some somatic processing, move your body in the way that you wished you could have, or say the things that you wished you could have, or somehow emote and express what is trapped within you. And so sometimes this can get really animated. Again, in the beginning, most people are pretty reserved. And so there's this fear of like being too much or expressing too much. So whatever ends up happening in that moment, then we move into step 6, which is really a 2-step part of forgiveness that we do. So when I identified after learning about what annoyed was for me, it's the belief that's being triggered when that sensation rises in myself is that I'm not important. And so the forgiveness part of that would be forgive me for believing that I'm not important. And then the response to that, whether I'm doing it with myself or in a dyad with another person, is that then I would hear like, thank goodness or thank God that's not true.
Yeah.
Right. Like how silly for me to believe that I'm not important. Of course I am. I wouldn't be here if I wasn't. Right. And the important part in the forgiveness process is that we're not feeding each other's ego. So for some people, they may have a belief that they're ugly or they're stupid or they're not good at fill in the blank, right? And so the response wouldn't be, yes, you're so beautiful, you're more pretty than so and so, or you're so intelligent, because the reality may be that that's not the case, right? To whoever is the perceiver of that thing. And this is where like the spirit, the truth of spirit or the truth of source is really important for my practice, is that I actually need to know what is true for me.
Yeah.
And so that's a discovery process that happens with my clients, is like, let's actually define that for you. Like, what is universally true for you and what isn't? And so then we go back into the memory over and over and over again until the child or the young adult or whoever is in the memory now feels neutral, which is peaceful. And then the person who's processing in modern time also feels peaceful. And then once that person is at a place of peace, then we say, what do you think you might have been forgetting that triggered that whole scenario? Right. And this is the remembrance. And so the last part of the forgiveness is forgive me for forgetting that I am important or that I'm lovable or that I'm whole or that I'm safe. Right. Like there's so many different truths that can be spoken. And so then there's homework assigned on how to integrate that and what practices to learn how to embody that and look for that. But it's really about, how does that person begin to recognize what's happening, respond lovingly, give space for what they're experiencing, and then reclaim what's true. And then it's about metabolizing that to then start to live it.
Yeah.
And it's amazing. It's really amazing. And then, fast forward doing all of that and providing support for people for the last many years. I started pursuing more work towards like, I want to help people learn how to live joyfully and be in pleasure and not just be hyper fixated on the shadow work and like the trauma.
Yeah.
Because there's this whole other world that we get to exist in.
Yeah.
And so that's been more of an evolution over the last, many years, but more specifically outwardly sharing with my people like this last year. So,
yeah. I love that. And that makes actually a lot of sense, like the trajectory of you leaning a little bit more into like the joyful, the light side versus the shadow side. Like I think both are equally important to explore, but I think because, and this is just like natural human tendency, right? We are a little bit more drawn to the negative, and it's more like it's more appealing. Like the drama of it is a little bit more like attention grabbing.
it's more
And
addictive.
it's more addictive. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
So how has your work shifted now that you're implementing that joyful, pleasurable side a little bit more? I'm curious to know what's different now in your practice.
Yeah. So historically, people would come to me because they had a problem. Um, the relationship was struggling.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost always a relationship, and it's either a relationship with an intimate partner, with a child, with a work,
Mm-hmm.
or with a substance, or um, with themselves, right? Like there's just some kind of uh, conflict is the focus.
Mm-hmm.
And now where I'm transitioning is that the desire or the want is the focus. So it's a lot of similar work,
Mm-hmm.
but there's like something that they're wanting to achieve. And that becomes, it's actually changing the kind of people that are coming to me as well. Right.
Yeah.
So um, if you consider that shift in a mindset of like what's wrong with me, I need to focus on what's wrong with me, to what do I want to live towards, what do I want to live into, what
Yeah.
am I excited about, what lights me up, what's important to me. It's all of those other things are going to rear their head, I promise you.
Yeah.
And this is where I've been very fascinated by the wellness industry and the coaching industry. Obviously manifestation is a hot topic, and I think it's beautiful. I think that there's a place for it. And I think if people don't have an understanding of how trauma interferes with our behavioral patterns, then actually what ends up happening is a lot of people invest in those manifestation programs that are typically high priced, and they don't get very far
Yeah.
with what they're wanting to manifest. And what I understand from a biopsychosocial perspective is that there's so much influencing us to stay where we are
Yes.
that um, making those shifts requires a lot of energy and attention. Um, have you ever heard of the uh, the unconscious incompetence scale?
Mm-mm.
So this is something that I typically use. So if people come to me to work with me as a new client, I require that they sign on for a minimum of 3 months.
Mm-hmm.
And what I do during that time is I show them this scale. And this was shown to me by a counselor, I don't know, probably 10 years ago. And I was like, I'm so grateful to have this awareness, because I want to say it's scientifically backed. I don't know specifically the studies, but anyway, there's 4 stages.
Mm-hmm.
The first one is unconsciously incompetent. And this is the one where I tell people, like, you're fucking up and you don't know it. Right.
Mm-hmm.
The next stage is you're fucking up and you're beginning to be aware of it. So there's unconscious and then there's conscious. So
Yeah.
unconscious incompetence, and now there's conscious incompetence. So this is where people usually seek innovative things: coaches, recovery programs, treatment facilities. They go to a gym, they sign up with a trainer, they get a nutritionist, right? Like whatever it is, this is where we become the seeker for the solution to the problem.
Mm-hmm.
Well, what happens is if we don't stay, so we move into, if we hire the person or we look up and do the research, we move into conscious competence. And this is a really beautiful place, but it's also can be exhausting. This is where we're putting all of our time and energy into learning this new way. And this is where relapse happens all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And it's because if you don't have somebody holding you to your highest regard and to that intention, you will lose sight of all of the growth that you've come through, because you may not see it in the same way, right? When you're so close, you can't always see it.
Yeah.
So during that third stage is where we as coaches and guides get to say, keep going. I know it feels like you're stuck. I know it feels
Mm-hmm.
like you're not growing right now, but I promise you, you've made huge headway. And being honest, right? If people aren't doing their homework or they're not doing the exercises, maybe they're
Right.
not. But there's that accountability piece that's really huge. And so as you move through that and you keep doing that exercises, then you move into unconscious competence. And that's where you have integrated it. You've
Mm-hmm.
learned to embody the practices, in a way that you no longer really need that. Maybe you don't need the weekly session anymore. Maybe you only need it every other week, or maybe you just need a monthly check-in, or maybe you don't need that at all. Maybe this really just sunk in with you and you're good and you can sail solo. And that's always the hope, right? Like,
Yeah.
if I have clients with me for a really long time, I have to look at what I'm doing
Yeah.
and see if there's somebody that I need to refer them on to,
Yeah.
or, what have you. But it's really key when we're in this time of transition, especially when you're looking at behavioral patterns that you may have been living with your whole lifetime, but also look at your lineage and see how long they've been living that behavioral pattern. Um, because a lot of people will get really frustrated with why they're not seeing more progress. I know that I can do that. Like, if
Yeah.
I feel like I've been working on something, um, there are days that I still wake up and think that I should have no problems.
Yeah.
I've been doing this for so long. Why am I not, waking up, and why aren't the birds coming to my window and singing to me?
Right, right. Exactly.
um, and so, yeah, it's really, for me, having an ongoing mentor has
Yeah.
always been vital in my joy and my bliss and just the things that are important to me.
Yeah. I love that you outlined those four like stages of competency, consciousness, because it makes a lot of sense. It makes a lot of sense, like why people can get stuck in loops, especially when they're trying to do it solo. And while I believe humans are capable of healing on their own, like we're also made to be in community with each other. We're made to co-nourish and co-regulate and
Mm.
and help each other heal. Like we're just a community-based species. And so I think it's so beautiful to be able to do this kind of work, to connect with other coaches, with other healers, whatever modalities they bring, because um every person's healing journey is also so individualized. And so being able to have so many resources accessible now and have I really do feel like this type of work is becoming more and more um mainstream and accepted, and like versus several years ago where like I would never hear anybody talking about hiring a coach or a healer, right? Like it just
Yeah.
wasn't really talked about that much. So um yeah, we've kind of come a long way in our society, and I think we do still have a long way to go, but um it's kind of
Yeah.
beautiful to have these gifts so accessible.
Yeah. And as you say that, I'm like, oh, the feeling right there. Step one, I'm upset. It was like this wave of shame. I've been really trying to stay committed to creating my online program so
Mhm.
that for those who may not be able to afford to work with me one on one, that
Mhm.
they can do the self paced program. And I started working more on it yesterday, and I got some good headway. I've been paralyzed as what it is like, I need help. Like,
Yeah,
and
oh
it's funny,
totally.
right? Like, I I see the validity, and also like the comedy of the hypocrisy of like providing this program, like, and providing the program to help people, and I need help to provide the program.
Yeah.
um because I don't know how to produce it in a way that it would be accessible. Like, do I put it on my website? Is there
Mhm.
some kind of software that I need to like make the things? And I still don't know. So if anybody wants to help me, let me know.
Mhm.
But yeah, my desire is to take the 12 weeks and do pre-recordings. And that in itself is such a potent way. And of course, then the person would just have that at their disposal. They could use it at any time. The difference, obviously, working with me one on one is I get to be really, really there with you in person and see exactly what's coming up for you and
Mhm.
guide you specifically to not only of what the program is suggesting and the themes that are in each week. But I get to use my intuition, which is actually a very powerful thing that comes through for me with ancestors and energies, and I can speak to the body.
Yeah.
So that plays a very different role. But in the event that I'm able to do that, then I can also start doing the online group work that I feel really passionate about. Because, like you just said, we're communal beings. And when people get to sit in a circle, it's always a circle in my head, even if we're online.
Yeah.
And you get to witness other people going through very similar things, even if the story or the circumstances are different. You get to see somebody in their anger, in their sadness, in their grief, in their confusion, in their numbness, and walk through it. It's so inspiring and humbling and healing. Like, I've done so much healing in just being able to witness people in their vulnerability and their courage and the beauty, right? We think that like being in our suffering is, you know, this is my brain, but like we believe that it's like ugly or forbidden or needs to be hidden, right? How many people cover their face when they cry?
Yeah.
And it's like this thing that we've been trained to like hide it. And if you actually see somebody and they're like raw, like full expression of grief, it's probably one of the most beautiful things that I've ever witnessed.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, yeah, doing group work, that's the goal. I would love to, offer regular online groups and in-person groups. And then of course, continue to work with people one-on-one. And the pleasure side of things is like just blowing my mind. And I'm on the fence, like right now, of what direction that's going to be going. But pelvic healing has been so profound. Like deeper layers of truly being in our bodies.
Yeah. Yeah. What comes to mind whenever you say that is I was watching this interview, I think, with Brene Brown, and she was talking about the most, like the scariest, the most terrifying emotion for people to feel is joy. Because and that like, whew, yeah, I even get like chills still just thinking about what the way she described it. And she told the story of this old man who she interviewed, and his wife had passed away. They were married for 50 something years. She had died of, I think, cancer it was, but he was always kind of one of those people that like didn't really show a lot of emotion, didn't really lean a lot into like the happiness, because there's always that feeling of like, my marriage is great, my kids are good, I'm healthy, everybody's fine, and then there's that fear of, oh, what's going to happen? Like the shoe is going to drop, or like something bad is going to happen. And I mean, I literally just had this conversation with my husband the other day. And when she died, he said his one regret was that he didn't lean more into those moments of joy, because it didn't protect him from what he felt then after she passed. And like she said, when we lose our tolerance for vulnerability, joy becomes foreboding. And I was like, oh, yeah.
Say that again.
Yeah.
I gotta hear that one again.
Yeah. When we lose our tolerance for vulnerability, joy becomes foreboding.
Oh, yeah. I feel that one big time.
Yeah.
Yeah. The conversations that have been floating around in my space recently, I've been listening to this book on audio called Magnificent Sex, and it's talking about what are the qualities that create magnificent sex. And one of them is play.
Yeah.
And we were talking about how quickly we as society are conditioned out of our silliness, like being playful and childlike. And what I recognize for me, and I've experienced this a few times, and I'll continue to experience it as my children get older. Bless you for having little ones. You've got some time to prepare.
Yeah.
is the closer that we get to something, the
Mm-hmm.
more we fear losing it.
Yeah. Yep.
Right? There's this like, and like you just reflected on, is like it didn't save the man from the grief of his wife's passing.
Mm-hmm.
And so I started having this experience. God, it was 8 years ago. No, it was even before that. God, it was like, so my oldest son is 21,
Mm-hmm.
and he started flying out to be with his dad, I think when he was like 5 or 6. But it didn't really start happening, I think, until he was like 9 or 10. So if I consider like the biological development and the psychological development, I'm like, yeah, that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Um, what started happening was like 2 weeks before he would go to visit his dad, which he would go for like most of the summer, which, like, as a mom, it's really hard to be away from your babies, but especially for long weeks or long periods of time. So, like 2 weeks before he would go to his dad's, he would just start being the biggest asshole.
Yeah.
And I was like, what is happening? And I remember going to my counselor and saying, I'm struggling so much. Like, my son's getting ready to leave and I want to have all this good time with him, but he's being so mean.
Mm-hmm.
And she said, this is evolution.
Mm-hmm.
It's easier for him to leave you if he's upset with you.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, you just defined like all breakups.
Yeah. Yeah. Totally.
Like, I have to be mad at you in order to acknowledge that this isn't working. Right. And I can
Mm-hmm.
go down another rabbit hole in that topic. But, to follow that thread, that like we as a society are so terrified of like really truly opening our hearts to love
Mm-hmm.
each other, because we're terrified of the distance that can be created
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
for whatever reason. And
Yeah.
I see that in my husband and I. Like, we're incredibly close.
Mm-hmm.
And we're laying in bed last night and I said, hey, I know I've been talking about it a lot, but we've been talking about building on our intimacy. I was like, turn towards me so I can see your face.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like just looking into each other's eyes.
Yeah.
And I told him the other day, we've been doing some repair work, which is really beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
And I told him the other day, I said, I want you to see me loving you,
Mm-hmm.
not just complaining, you
Yeah.
know? And we start to turn away from those situations. And he sent me this thing this morning, actually just a couple hours ago. And I'm going to botch it and I can't pull it up to look at it because it's on the gadget I'm using right now. But
Yeah.
something along the lines of learning how to lean in when we hear things that may feel critical, and seeing it as an invitation to change and not a confirmation that there's something wrong with us.
Yeah.
And I think
Yeah.
that that's a big challenge for people in partnership, is like,
Yeah.
can I reflect on this thing that happened and we not assume that it's another one of my counselors used to say, don't go global, right? Like, there's this one thing that I'd like to like focus on for a moment and like tweak or adjust or whatever, and
Mm-hmm.
it not feel like it like ruined the whole thing, you
Mm.
know?
Yeah.
Um, and how much closer to ourselves and each other that we could actually be if we could know that, like, oh,
Yeah.
hey, it is okay to make a mistake.
Yeah. Yeah. It's actually beautiful to make mistakes.
Yeah.
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 Oh,
So,
so good. So good. And I'm really excited because a lot of the work that you've shared with us here during this hour is also um you know it's so important. And I also think that whenever we can get together and do this type of work in person, and like I know you've been a part of a lot of retreats and those types of like healing environments. You're going to get to be a guest at Sterling and I's retreat coming this
Yay.
summer. What, whenever we think about doing this kind of work in that environment, in a retreat setting, in person, what do you notice most about people? Because I know that a lot of work can be done online too, but there's
Mhm.
something about being physically present with other humans and being seen by other humans as your authentic self. What do you notice? What do you notice about people and how powerful those experiences can be?
What comes to mind when I'm giggling is the utter relief that you're not going to die.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
It's this like, oh, just I think what it brings up is acceptance.
Mhm. Mhm.
What I was first going to say is so many people feel relieved to know that they're not alone. And
Mhm.
you can get that in person and you can get that online. The depth in which it's felt when you're in person, for
Mhm.
me,
Yeah.
and I would say collectively, is richer. You're steeped in it versus, maybe a quick dunk or whatnot.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, but doing the work collectively, knowing that you're not alone, there's a certain reinforcement of a connection and a relationship that you may have always known that's ancient, that lives in your bones and your blood.
Mm. Mhm.
It's, to consider what might be thought of when we would say like a tribe mind or a hive mind, that we all truly want the same things. And
Mm.
what's happening that I see is that we're all just kind of going about it in different ways. And so when you come together collectively and you're willing to work in a similar way, then
Mhm.
you get to find your people.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's profound in a world that feels starved of connection.
Yeah. Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah, it just reminds me of an exercise. I co-facilitated a retreat last week, and we kind of broke up into different like little smaller groups, and I was leading this one group, and the exercise was to state a bold truth that could risk you getting kicked out of the room. Like it was so, and I started off with a really funny one to kind of keep the mood a little bit light. And then as people went around in the circle, it just got more and more emotional and deep. And people of all different religious backgrounds and political beliefs, and they were all boldly stating their truths, and none of them were defensive about it. None of them were, it was just like the most beautiful thing I've ever witnessed. Like people were breaking down and sharing their truths, and everybody could have just been naked, right?
Yeah.
Like exposing
Yes.
everything about themselves, and it was the most beautiful. Like a lot of these people didn't know each other.
Hmm.
And then afterwards, I'm seeing them create some really, really strong bonds with each other, even with people who have totally opposite opinions and perspectives and viewpoints as them. And I was just like, wow, this is
I
surreal. This
have
is
chills.
really cool. Yeah.
Yeah, because that's the healing right there.
Yeah.
Is like
Mhm.
to really truly understand that we aren't separate.
Mhm.
And even if we believe differently, like that, it's not worth being disconnected over. And
Yeah.
I love you mentioning the naked because of where we met
That
and
we met.
how that,
That is literally how we met.
yeah,
Let's give people like a how did we meet?
right. I hosted a day retreat at a bathhouse and
Yeah.
you attended, and
Yeah.
we got where we met, we got naked together, literally and figuratively.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's one of my favorite things about the work that I do is,
Mhm.
there go my dogs.
Mhm.
Um, is I ask people to get naked mentally, emotionally, and sometimes bodily, right? Some of the work
Yeah.
that I'm doing, it's getting real naked and real close and intimate.
Yeah.
Um, And what's beautiful about that, like you said, is there's an increase as people go about, right? Like whoever shared first, like you said, you made it light and funny. And then by the end, somebody may have been sharing the secret that they thought they'd take to the grave.
Oh, totally.
And that's like the catharsis of letting that out. That was what I was talking about when you were talking to me about like, what is the thing that I do is I sit with people and let them share their darkest guilt and shame and let me love them in that space. And it's amazing to find out the things that we've done in our lifetimes that we carry guilt and shame for. And some of them, I don't want to dismiss the lessons and the teacher of guilt and shame. Guilt and shame are not bad. They're a floodlight that are asking you to look at the choices that you're making in life.
Yeah.
Right. And if you look at them honestly and you say, yeah, I feel good about the decision that I made, then own it. Right. There's no need for guilt and shame. But for most of us, there's some things we can look back at and go, yeah, I wish I would have done that different. Right.
Yeah.
So the healing comes into how do I understand why I did what I did and bringing compassion to that space.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love sitting in a circle and having people just offload those things. It's so powerful.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, it really is. I'm sure we could probably have a whole day's worth of conversations about all this work. But just is there anything else that's on your heart that you're feeling called to share, to speak into the community of people listening?
Yeah, as we've been talking over the last few minutes, I'm working to stay present. And I was thinking of, closing and circling it back. And I think of why, like for a lot of us who do this work, a big piece of it is to know the answer to why. And what I'm excited about in presenting at the retreat with you in Sterling is my why. It's to be in the most liberated expression of who I am as a woman.
Yeah.
And what does it mean for me to be seen? And I know we talked about it in our chat leading up to this of like, it's not about being seen by other people. That's a piece of it.
Yeah.
And that's often the hurdle that we have to get over in order to fully see ourselves. It's the external evidence and validation and safety that we're actually looking for within ourselves that we get to receive externally that says that it's okay to do it internally.
Yeah.
And some people work it differently. Some people need it internally before they can do it externally.
Yeah.
Right. So depending on the person. But my why is because I fucking love living in my most authentic expressed self.
Yeah.
Like this wild, liberated, loving, accepting, compassionate, kind, fierce, joyful human being.
Yeah.
And if that means dressing up and adorning my body and the space that I'm in and putting on amazing music and helping people break through those barriers that they've also been feeling stuck by, what a better thing to do than have everybody reach in their pockets and see that they've been holding the key the whole time to unlock that cage and just be free.
Yeah. Oof. So good.
Yeah.
Yeah. So good. I'm so excited. I'm so excited. It's going to be our retreat this summer for those of you who aren't already convinced that you're going to have a powerful experience after listening to this interview. Invitation to join us for all of this magic. Where can people find you if they want to learn more, if they want to just kind of see what you're up to and be a little bit more immersed in the work that you do? Where are you hanging out?
Mostly Instagram. So at Sensuous Revival, that's my Instagram handle. Also our retreat center, you can find out the events that we have here called Wild Nature Retreat, also on Instagram. I have a website that is gravely outdated, and that's also on the list of things that needs to be redone. But for the most part, if you go on there, the about page that speaks to my past and why I do the work that I do, that's still pretty accurate.
Mhm.
Um, the difference being more of the modern work and services that I'm offering is really truly about some deep work with the pelvic floor. I'm offering sacred pelvic healing work, which means internal and external,
Mhm.
working with the somatics, the fascia.
Yeah.
There's so much that goes into that. And I'm inclusive. So I
Yeah.
make jokes. I don't care what your plumbing is,
Yeah.
what body you were born into. All
Mhm.
beings are welcome. Um, and then we also have a newsletter that goes out very rarely.
Mhm.
Just my ego's like, I should tell you, I have these two businesses. I have three kids. I have a
Mhm.
husband and a home and 2.5 acres, and it's a lot of work. So
Yeah.
sometimes the content that is constantly being produced internally doesn't always get fully
Yeah.
out to the world. But Instagram is a creative outlet for me.
Yeah.
And so that's where I do put a lot of my information and produce it so that the viewers can also get a taste of what's happening.
Yeah. Yeah. Beautiful.
Mm.
All of those links to your stuff will be in the show notes. Um, and yeah, invitation for anyone listening. If you would like to join Aiua and I and Sterling, you guys have already heard her in a couple podcasts ago. Um, yeah, invitation to sign up. We still have some spots left. The dates are July 26th through 28th here in Washington State, and we would really, really love to have you. Um, thank you so much, Aiua, for coming onto the show, for sharing your gifts, for just being an amazing human.
Thank you. Yeah, this is really beautiful. I know we can spend days talking. I feel that way with Sterling too. I feel
Yeah,
like we need to have a girls' weekend. We're
we
just
do.
and Nicole can come too. Like the four of
Yes.
us could just go away. That's actually a
Yeah.
really beautiful idea.
That sounds great, actually.
Yeah. Thank you for
Um,
having me.
oh, you're so welcome.